In 1993, Valerie Pape, aged 41, resided in New York City. Described as petite, standing at 5 feet 2 inches, Valerie had blonde hair and was known for her gentle and caring nature. Hailing from France, she worked as a caregiver for Howard Pomerantz, an elderly man. Through her employment, she encountered Howard's son, Ira, aged 54. Ira was loud and outspoken, making his presence unmistakably known in any room. Valerie possessed beauty that captivated attention. Her attire was always carefully chosen, and she took immense pride in ensuring her hair, makeup, and clothing were flawless whenever she stepped out. It didn't take long for Ira to be drawn to Valerie. They began dating, and their relationship appeared to be thriving. On November 18, 1995, Ira and Valerie got married. Valerie looked stunning in her exquisite gown, and she was escorted down the aisle by her dear friend, Michael Savage, who hailed from France like her. Valerie and Michael shared a deep bond, forged through their shared experience of immigrating from France. That year, they relocated to an upscale neighborhood in Scottsdale, Arizona. Valerie relished the consistent warm climate, and soon the couple became prominent figures in social circles. Meanwhile, Ira established 2 bars nearby in Chandler, Arizona. Concurrently, Valerie pursued her passion by attending beauty school. In 1997, with financial support from Ira, Valerie fulfilled her dream of opening her own beauty salon. Michael Savage, who had previously played a significant role in Valerie's life, joined the couple in Scottsdale. Michael contributed to the salon by handling administrative tasks such as answering phones and managing reservations. To ensure Michael's legal status in the country, Valerie included him as one of the salon's owners. The relationship between Valerie and Michael does indeed raise questions, given Michael's consistent presence and Valerie's apparent willingness to support him. Their shared immigration background from France likely contributed to their tight bond. Their relationship seemed exceptionally close, a dynamic that didn't escape Ira's notice. While Ira was generally regarded as a decent person, he grappled with anger issues and struggled with alcohol abuse, which exacerbated his flaws. In 1998, he faced legal consequences for driving under the influence. Additionally, Ira's shortcomings extended to his business ventures, as he developed a reputation for mistreating employees, engaging in unethical business practices such as overcharging and watering down drinks, and disregarding regulations while managing 2 bars. Ira faced further legal trouble when fined by the Liquor Control Board for serving alcohol to minors and for operating after hours, violating regulations. Coupled with unpaid debts and declining business, Ira was forced to close one of his bars, with the second one on the brink of closure. By 1999, Ira was in the midst of bankruptcy proceedings. Compounding their financial woes, Valerie had grown accustomed to a lavish lifestyle, driving a new Jaguar and exclusively wearing high-end designer clothing. The couple frequently clashed over their financial struggles, exacerbating Ira's difficulty in managing his temper. Michael Savage, who was very close with the couple, eventually moved in with them, becoming a constant presence in their relationship. Despite Michael's supportive role, Ira harbored suspicions of an affair between Valerie and Michael, adding strain to their already tense situation. Expressing frustration to friends, Ira admitted he couldn't keep pace with Valerie's extravagant spending and contemplated divorce. The arguments escalated to the point where Valerie felt compelled to enroll in self-defense classes and learn firearm skills as a precautionary measure for her safety. Ira possessed a sizable collection of handguns, which fueled Valerie's fear that he might use one against her. Feeling desperate to escape from Ira, Valerie and Michael sought refuge with Valerie's friend, Merle, in September 1999. However, Merle was grappling with her own troubles. During their stay with Merle, she reported her husband missing. Shortly after Valerie and Ira reconciled, Valerie and Michael returned to live with him. However, just a week after their return, Merle's husband, Ron Bianchi, was discovered murdered. Upon their return home, tensions persisted, reaching a frightening peak when Valerie accused Ira of grabbing numerous kitchen knives during a heated argument and hurling them at her. Despite Ira's denial of these accusations, Valerie obtained an order of protection against him, resulting in Ira being compelled to vacate the residence. However, within a few days, Ira breached the order, prompting Valerie to contact the authorities. A week later, the couple reconciled, and Valerie decided to retract the order against Ira, stating that she had received apologies. Ira moved back into the home. In the early hours of January 28, 2000, approximately 25 miles away from Scottsdale in Mesa, Arizona, a truck driver making a 5 a.m. delivery noticed something peculiar behind a grocery store. He observed a blue Jaguar parked in the vicinity, and his curiosity was piqued by the sight of a petite blonde woman dressed in high heels, gloves, sunglasses, and a jumpsuit, removing a large object wrapped in plastic from her trunk. Despite her diminutive stature, the woman struggled to hoist the plastic-wrapped package above her head before depositing it into a nearby dumpster. The delivery driver found the situation deeply unsettling and made a note of the license plate of the blue Jaguar before it departed. After the car left, he approached the dumpster to investigate its contents. Upon opening the plastic bag, he was horrified to discover a large piece of what appeared to be a human body. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, he promptly contacted law enforcement. Upon arrival, the police uncovered a male torso in the dumpster, with the head, arms, and legs all missing. When investigators traced the license plate, it led back to Valerie. Valerie was taken into custody at her salon while she was working, leaving everyone there stunned. Many found it difficult to believe that someone like her could be involved in such a gruesome act, especially the dismemberment of a body. Some argued that Valerie's petite stature made it implausible for her to carry out such a task. Opinions among people were divided regarding what might have transpired. However, there were indications suggesting that Ira had allegedly been physically abusing Valerie, a fact known to some in their social circle. Valerie's situation was deeply troubling, especially considering the visible bruises on her body that she had to conceal while continuing to work at the salon. During her interrogation on January 28th, she confessed to disposing of the torso in the dumpster, but vehemently denied being responsible for Ira's death. However, what she told the police was so incredulous that it's difficult to convey without a sense of disbelief. Valerie claimed that she returned home to find Ira dead on the floor, but she had no knowledge of who had killed him. Her response to this supposed scenario was to dismember his body to avoid suspicion falling on her. Despite admitting to this gruesome act, Valerie refused to disclose the whereabouts of the remaining body parts. She also mentioned discovering the body on January 24th, while the truck driver observed her disposing of the torso on January 28th, leaving a 4-day gap between when she claimed to have found the body and when she was witnessed discarding part of it. However, she refused to provide any explanation for her actions during those 4 days. Valerie was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Additionally, police conducted a search of Merle Bianchi's residence. Authorities found this sequence of events highly suspicious, considering that both Valerie and Merle had lost their husbands within just 4 months of each other, and Valerie and Michael were staying with Merle at the time her husband disappeared. While the police did test the gun found in Valerie's car against the bullet recovered from Ron Bianchi, Merle's husband, there was no match. Consequently, it was determined that the gun in Valerie's possession was not the one used to kill Ronald. The police doubted Valerie's ability to have dismembered Ira by herself. Dismembering a body requires significant effort and is not easily accomplished. The police's suspicions turned towards Michael and his potential involvement, considering the difficulty of the task. Naturally, they questioned Valerie about this, but she maintained that Michael had no involvement in the matter. During the search of the home, the police discovered a recently purchased saw and saw blades, all acquired by Valerie within the last few months. Additionally, Valerie had taken shooting lessons just a month before the murder. These findings led the police to believe that the murder was premeditated rather than an act of self-defense. Valerie's claim shifted from self-defense to asserting that she stumbled upon her husband's lifeless body and felt compelled to take drastic measures because she feared being implicated as a suspect. But the police knew that this was a very calculated, planned, intentional murder. The police then searched the bars that Ira had owned, thinking that maybe Valerie had stored Ira's body in the freezer. According to the study, frozen tissue is considerably easier to cut. Investigators theorized that Valerie could have only managed to dismember her husband alone by freezing his body and cutting him in a freezer. However, no evidence was found to definitively identify the perpetrator. Efforts to establish Michael's role in the crime proved futile. Although a saw was discovered, it bore no fingerprints, nor did any of the other tools used in the dismemberment. There was no tangible evidence to contradict Valerie's account or to implicate her in the murder. The absence of a gun, recordings, witness testimonies, or bloodstains made it impossible to ascertain the identity of the assailant. The trial proved to be intricate, spanning over 2 years, yet all the remains were never recovered, and the murder weapon remained elusive. Valerie could afford a competent lawyer, and the defense strategy focused on highlighting the domestic abuse she had endured over the years. Despite this, she was presented with an offer to confess to second-degree murder in exchange for a reduced sentence. After spending 2.5 years in prison awaiting trial, Valerie eventually confessed to shooting Ira Pomerantz during a heated argument. She pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of second-degree murder, resulting in a sentence of just 16 years in prison as part of a plea agreement. Nevertheless, many of Valerie's friends were discontented with the outcome, refusing to believe her involvement in the incident and suspecting that she had been framed. In 2006, there was a proposal to deport Valerie back to her native France through a prisoner exchange program. It was suggested that Valerie could be transferred to France in exchange for an American prisoner. However, Ira's relatives became aware of this plan. Concerned that Valerie might evade justice by being released in France due to lenient laws, they contacted law enforcement agencies and insisted that Valerie should continue serving her sentence in Arizona. Their requests were granted, and Valerie completed her entire sentence, being released from prison in 2016 at the age of 63. Following her release, she was promptly deported to France. On August 17, 2014, a Sunday, Robert Lyman, aged 38, was asked to cover a shift for a colleague at his job. This wasn't uncommon for Robert, as he was known for his strong work ethic and willingness to take on extra responsibilities. He worked at the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway train yard in Tehachapi, California, which was approximately a 45-minute drive from his residence in Silver Lake's Helendale, Kern County. Robert lived there with his wife, Sabrina Limon, and their 2 children. Before leaving for work, Robert assured his family that he would be home after his shift. However, he never returned home that day. Sabrina had spoken to Robert earlier that morning, and he mentioned he was busy with work and had to grab a quick lunch, a tuna melt, on the fly. Later in the day, Sabrina went to visit her mother, who had recently suffered a hip injury. Around 5 p.m., she sent Robert a text message, but when she didn't receive a response, she wasn't immediately alarmed, considering his busy schedule. Robert was expected home by 8 p.m., but as the time passed without his arrival, Sabrina grew increasingly worried. Despite her attempts to reach him via text and phone calls, she received no response, leaving her anxiously waiting for any sign of his whereabouts. Shortly afterward, 2 of Robert's colleagues appeared at Sabrina's doorstep with somber news. Robert had been injured at work. Sabrina later recounted to the detective that she interpreted this as an indication of a workplace accident, knowing only that Robert had sustained head injuries from blunt force. However, police investigations revealed a grim truth. Robert was not a victim of a workplace accident, but had been deliberately killed. When questioned by the authorities about potential motives or suspects, Sabrina and those close to Robert insisted they were unaware of anyone who would wish him harm. Described as affable and carefree by co-workers, friends, and family, Robert seemed to have no known enemies. In response to the tragedy, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway offered a substantial reward of $100,000 for any information leading to the apprehension and conviction of the perpetrator responsible for Robert's murder. Robert's body was discovered inside one of the railway yard buildings around 6:46 p.m., having been last seen by co-workers approximately an hour earlier at 5 p.m. He had suffered 2 gunshot wounds, one to the face, which passed through and exited his neck, and another to the chest, with the bullet traveling upward and becoming lodged in his jaw. Law enforcement managed to acquire surveillance footage from a security camera capturing a mysterious figure roaming the railway yard. This individual, dressed in bulky attire and displaying a noticeable limp, was spotted on the footage. Broadening their investigation beyond the immediate vicinity, police secured additional footage from a nearby gas station surveillance camera depicting someone bearing a resemblance to the figure observed in the railway yard footage. This individual was riding a motorcycle, and the timing aligned closely with when authorities suspected the murder occurred. Considering various angles, police explored the possibility that the shooting might have stemmed from a robbery within the yard, especially since Robert's office had been tampered with. However, this explanation seemed improbable given the presence of other offices and businesses nearby with potentially more lucrative assets. Instead, investigators leaned towards the theory that Robert had been specifically targeted. While authorities delved into potential motives, Sabrina took to her social media platforms to share her profound grief and admiration for Robert. In the midst of this unbearable pain and tragedy, Rob's love endures. We were blessed with Rob's presence for the time we had, and the love he bestowed upon us surpassed what many may ever experience or express. I will carry his love with me wherever I tread, and I will ensure our children are reminded of it each day as they mature. It's a bittersweet feeling of joy, yet I am completely numb to the reality of being left behind on this earth without him. As police delved deeper into Robert's life in search of potential motives, they received a call from a man named Jason Bernatine. Jason and his wife Kelly were known to be close friends of Sabrina and Robert. However, as investigators continued their inquiries, they unearthed a more complex relationship between them. It emerged that they were not just friends, but were involved in a swinger-type group where couples engaged in sexual activities with others, and the Limons were active participants. Despite this revelation, Jason's call to the police wasn't related to their lifestyle. Jason expressed concerns about a man named Jonathan Hearn and urged authorities to speak with him. This revelation added a new layer of complexity to the investigation. Jason disclosed to the police that he had become aware of Sabrina's extramarital affair with Jonathan Hearn, a 24-year-old firefighter whom he knew through work and mutual social gatherings. Despite Jason's confrontation with Jonathan, imploring him to cease the affair, his warnings were futile, and Sabrina and Jonathan continued their relationship. According to Jason, his initial interaction with Jonathan involved him becoming emotionally overwhelmed and expressing his displeasure in a confrontational manner. Additionally, Jason's wife, Kelly, recounted observing Jonathan visiting Sabrina's residence shortly after Robert's murder, bearing a significant bouquet of flowers, specifically noted as Sabrina's favorites. Notably, Jonathan sent Jason a series of text messages following Robert's death, which struck Jason as peculiar and prompted him to contact the authorities. These messages from Jonathan appeared to be centered around seeking forgiveness for his perceived wrongdoing. Kelly also revealed that Sabrina shared with her a letter she received from Jonathan, praising Robert's character and expressing remorse for his actions. Despite the absence of any arrests in connection with Robert's death, Sabrina appeared to be noticeably content about the letter, prompting Kelly's unease regarding the situation. Kelly recounted Sabrina's reaction, saying, "Isn't this sweet? Listen to this. Listen to how sweet Jonathan is." Detectives harbored suspicions regarding Jonathan and Sabrina's involvement in Robert's death. However, they opted not to disclose their knowledge of the affair to Sabrina during the ongoing investigation. Instead, they subtly probed into Sabrina's marriage, utilizing Robert's phone, which contained explicit images of various women, including Sabrina herself. When questioned about possible infidelity or an open marriage arrangement, Sabrina adamantly denied any such arrangement, asserting that she and Robert had a strong relationship. Sabrina's denial only fueled the detectives' suspicions. If they were engaged in a consensual, open relationship, why lie? This discrepancy prompted further doubts about Sabrina's honesty and raised questions about what else she might be concealing. Over the course of a 3-month investigation, evidence confirmed Sabrina's long-term affair with Jonathan, spanning nearly 2 years. Detective utilizing wiretaps and strategic planning devised a simple yet effective strategy. He provided Sabrina with false details about their investigation and monitored whether she would divulge this information to Jonathan. Sabrina's subsequent sharing of these fabricated details validated the detective's suspicions. The recordings of Sabrina's calls with the detective revealed a troubling pattern. Shortly after ending conversations with law enforcement, she would promptly contact Jonathan and divulge the details of their discussions. Their conversations, captured in these recordings, often centered around their professed love for each other, acknowledgement of their sins, and their shared quest for divine forgiveness. Their conversations were laden with pleas for divine absolution, with Jonathan acknowledging, "We've been dirtbags, we've been sinners." As the investigation unfolded, law enforcement officers meticulously gathered information not only through phone recordings, but also by scrutinizing surveillance footage and following up on tips phoned into the hotline. When authorities obtained a clearer image of the individual captured in the surveillance footage, they presented it to Sabrina, citing a tip identifying the man as someone named John who had connections to Robert. Upon questioning, Sabrina provided the names of 2 men she knew named John, but notably omitted any mention of Jonathan. However, others familiar with Jonathan recognized him in the image and promptly alerted the police. Both Jonathan and Sabrina were arrested and questioned in relation to Robert's murder. Sabrina was released due to lack of evidence. Jonathan was charged with first-degree murder. Sabrina was informed that she would be summoned to testify against Jonathan, yet this scenario never materialized. However, unbeknownst to Sabrina at the time, Jonathan had decided to cooperate with the authorities. In exchange for his cooperation and to avoid the prospect of a life sentence without parole, Jonathan entered a guilty plea for manslaughter. He was subsequently sentenced to 25 years and 4 months in prison. Jonathan acknowledged his culpability for voluntary manslaughter with firearm enhancement, attempted murder, poisoning, and accessory to murder. Meanwhile, Sabrina found herself charged with first-degree murder, to which she pleaded not guilty. During Sabrina's trial, the prosecution put forward the argument that while Jonathan physically carried out the act of shooting and killing Robert, Sabrina was an active participant in the planning and execution of the murder, thus making her equally culpable. Prosecutor Eric Smith emphasized to the court that there was substantial evidence beyond Jonathan's testimony implicating Sabrina, including wiretapped phone calls, text messages, and her deceitful behavior towards law enforcement. These pieces of evidence, Smith contended, pointed towards Sabrina's complicity in facilitating the crime. The court was presented with details regarding the extensive communication between Sabrina and Jonathan on the day of Robert's murder, with Jonathan placing 5 calls to Sabrina, totaling 3 hours and 43 minutes of conversation. Furthermore, the prosecution highlighted Sabrina's role in providing Jonathan with information about Robert's whereabouts and work schedule on the day of the incident. Prosecutors argued that Sabrina's motive for orchestrating her husband's murder stemmed from her desire for a new life with Jonathan. They asserted that Sabrina aimed to eliminate Robert so she could marry Jonathan and have him assume a paternal role for her children. Additionally, the prosecution pointed out a potential financial incentive for Sabrina, as she stood to gain $300,000 from life insurance payouts and could potentially receive a settlement from Robert's employer due to his death occurring at the workplace. Jonathan emerged as the key witness for the prosecution, providing crucial testimony regarding the planning and execution of Robert's murder. He recounted to the court that both he and Sabrina concluded that the only way they could proceed with their relationship was if Robert was no longer alive. Their desire was for Jonathan to assume the role of the children's caregiver, with the intention of raising them in a God-fearing environment. Throughout his testimony, Jonathan emphasized their shared commitment to their faith, citing their love for God and the Bible. He detailed the extensive planning involved in Robert's murder, revealing that he had fallen deeply in love with Sabrina over the course of their 2-year affair, and they were determined to eliminate the obstacle posed by her husband. Jonathan described the events of August 17, 2014, recalling how he returned home after a night shift and subsequently conferred with Sabrina over the phone about their plan before proceeding to the train yard to carry out the deed. He testified that they meticulously discussed the layout of the railway complex and devised strategies to avoid detection. Sabrina, aware of Robert's potentially confrontational nature, cautioned Jonathan to exercise caution, acknowledging that Robert was not someone who would surrender without resistance. Jonathan informed the court that he rode his motorcycle to Tehachapi, having removed the license plate, and brought along a backpack containing a change of clothes and a .45 caliber handgun equipped with a makeshift silencer crafted from a large Maglite flashlight barrel and engine freeze plugs. Upon arriving at the Burlington Northern Santa Fe train yard where Robert was employed, Jonathan observed Robert in a garage. He then positioned himself between nearby buildings, contemplating his next actions after saying a prayer. Subsequently, he entered the garage, engaging in a brief conversation with Robert. Seizing an opportune moment when Robert turned away to stock a refrigerator, Jonathan drew the handgun, approached him, and fatally shot him. Jonathan justified his actions by stating, "It was inevitable for Rob to be eliminated for Sabrina and me to progress in our relationship." Following the initial gunshot, Jonathan proceeded to the office where he pilfered some items, later explaining to the court that he and Sabrina believed it would be advantageous for the incident to appear as a robbery. Returning to the location where Robert lay, Jonathan fired a second shot as a precautionary measure, ensuring Robert's demise. He recounted notifying Sabrina of the deed, and they mutually agreed to refrain from contacting each other for a period to evade suspicion. Jonathan expressed experiencing a sense of relief after the killing. The court heard that just days after Robert was murdered, Sabrina sent multiple text messages to Jonathan. She didn't even question who could have killed her husband in the text messages, and prosecutors argued that that was because she already had the answer. Instead, she just constantly told Jonathan how much she loved him. "I adore you, Jonathan Hearn, you sexy guy." According to Jonathan's testimony, the day Robert was killed wasn't the first attempt on his life. Months prior to the murder, Jonathan stated that they had plotted to poison Robert. He had ordered arsenic online and mixed it into banana pudding, testing it first on his neighbor's dog. Jonathan then gave a portion of the poison pudding to Sabrina with the plan for her to pass it to Robert, intending for him to take it to work for lunch. However, Sabrina later instructed Robert to discard the pudding, claiming the bananas had spoiled, out of fear of being caught. The prosecution urged the jury to consider not only Jonathan's testimony, but also Sabrina's conversations on wiretapped calls and thousands of text messages when determining her guilt. In contrast, the defense argued that the only evidence against Sabrina was Jonathan's testimony, which they deemed unreliable, portraying him as a cold and calculated killer who had received a lighter sentence through a plea deal. They characterized the prosecution's reliance on Jonathan as striking a pact with the devil. Sabrina took the stand during her trial and confessed to having an affair with Jonathan, but maintained that she was unaware of his plan to kill her husband. The jury learned that Sabrina provided Jonathan with directions to Robert's workplace and details of his work hours on the day of the shooting, using a disposable phone to communicate with him. In her testimony, Sabrina claimed she shared her husband's work schedule with Jonathan solely because she desired to meet with him. Sabrina testified that initially she was content in her marriage to Robert. However, their relationship dynamics shifted in 2008 when they began exploring a swingers lifestyle, which she described as altering the sanctity of their bond. Despite this, she affirmed her love for Robert and hadn't even contemplated leaving him. However, the introduction of this lifestyle led to increased alcohol consumption and a focus on excessive partying and sexual activities, causing strain on their relationship. During her testimony, Sabrina revealed that she met Jonathan at a challenging point in her marriage, while she was working at Costco distributing samples. Initially, their interaction was a friendship, but Jonathan, seeing her a few times at Costco, eventually asked for her number. Sabrina explained to the court that she started developing feelings for him, as he was intelligent and genuinely focused on her, making her feel special in a way she hadn't experienced before. Describing the affair as a kind of second life, Sabrina made plans with Jonathan about their shared dreams while still expressing love for her husband, Robert. She emphasized to the court that she never entertained the thought of harming her husband. When questioned by her lawyer about why she initially lied to the police regarding any involvement with someone else, Sabrina admitted it was due to embarrassment. She didn't want her personal life to become public. The lawyer highlighted the recorded calls and text messages, arguing that there was no evidence within them indicating Sabrina's knowledge of Jonathan's plan to kill Robert. He stated, "There's nothing in there that says, 'Oh, by the way, get rid of my husband for me.'" The court heard emotional pleas from Sabrina's two children, who begged the court not to separate them from their mother. After deliberating for less than 6 hours, the jury rendered their verdict. Sabrina was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, soliciting murder, and being an accessory after the fact. However, she was acquitted of charges related to attempted murder and poisoning in connection to the pudding incident. Sabrina was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison, with an additional 16 months to be served consecutively. Despite the support from her family, including her cousin, who denounced the verdict as unjust and questioned the credibility of Jonathan's testimony, the jury's decision was based on a thorough examination of all the evidence presented, including Jonathan's testimony and recordings. Milton Henry Sawyer was born on July 9, 1963, in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Milton was from a blended family. His parents were not together from the time that he was young. He was described as someone who was laid back, easygoing, and easy to get along with. Milton was easygoing, fun, and energetic. He just had a lot of love to give. As a child, Milton and his father bonded over antiques or collectible items. This was something that they both really enjoyed doing together, and they often bonded over finding these little odds and ends that they both really enjoyed. As Milton grew older, he did have a typical job, but he was not feeling fulfilled in that. Eventually, he decided to open his own shop that he called the Treasure Hunter. This was an antique store, but also almost had a pawn shop vibe, but more high-end. It was a place where people could come and sell their old antique items and those kinds of things. This was something that Milton was very interested in, and he was really excited about opening this business. Milton was also married. He had a few children with his wife, and he loved being a father. He enjoyed taking his kids with him to the Treasure Hunter, and he just wanted to spend as much time with his children as possible. Unfortunately, this first marriage did end in divorce in the early 2000s. Milton was one of those people who wanted to have a partner in life. He wanted to spend time with somebody and grow old with somebody. So, in 2011, he met a woman named Angel. Angel had 3 children of her own, and she was married, and their children went to the same school as Milton's did. Milton and Angel eventually met and started talking, and it was soon found out that Angel was actually going through a separation with her husband. Milton and Angel really hit it off. They bonded over being single parents and figuring out the whole dynamic of taking their kids back and forth. However, it wasn't until Angel was officially divorced from her husband that Milton took his shot and asked Angel out. Milton and Angel's initial connection deepened as they started talking, and it became apparent that Angel was going through a separation with her husband. Their shared experiences as single parents navigating the complexities of raising their children fostered a strong bond between them. However, it wasn't until after Angel's official divorce that Milton seized the opportunity and asked her out, marking the beginning of their romantic relationship. Their relationship progressed rapidly, with Milton quickly falling deeply in love with Angel. After meeting in 2011, they wasted no time, tying the knot by 2012. Angel seamlessly integrated herself into the operations of the treasure hunter. Milton, known for his laid-back approach to organization, welcomed Angel's initiative in reorganizing and improving the appearance of their shop. Their collaboration brought them closer together, and they appeared to genuinely enjoy working side by side. From an outsider's perspective, their marriage seemed idyllic and almost perfect. Milton and Angel's blended family consisted of 7 children, echoing Milton's own experience growing up in a blended household. He was determined to ensure that their family harmonized well, much like his own upbringing. Fortunately, the children seemed to genuinely get along, fostering a warm and unified family environment. Milton demonstrated his affection for Angel by lavishing her with attention and gifts. Whenever valuable or luxurious items were brought into the treasure hunter, he reserved them for Angel, ensuring she received them. He would buy her the cars that she wanted. For the initial 5 years, Milton and Angel's relationship appeared to be flourishing until a setback occurred in 2017, when Angel was involved in a minor car accident. This incident resulted in hip and back injuries, making her recovery challenging. Despite consulting numerous doctors, her condition didn't improve significantly. Eventually, she was advised to seek treatment from a physical therapist, which she did, attending several sessions to address her injuries. As Angel continued her physical therapy sessions, Milton gradually noticed a shift in her behavior. While previously she would simply don comfortable attire for her appointments, she began taking longer showers and putting on makeup, dressing more stylishly before leaving. Milton began to suspect that his wife was cheating. Despite his suspicions, Angel vehemently denied any affair, adamantly asserting her loyalty to Milton. The physical therapist was 38-year-old Isaac Melcher. Despite Isaac Melcher's outward appearance of professionalism and dedication to his family, Milton couldn't shake his suspicions regarding Angel's behavior during her physical therapy sessions with Isaac. Isaac, a married man with 3 children, appeared to lead a devout life, regularly attending church and actively participating in his religious community. On the surface, it seemed unlikely that he would engage in any inappropriate behavior. However, Milton's observations of Angel's sudden change in attire and demeanor raised red flags, leading him to believe that something untoward might be happening. So he chose to contact Isaac's physical therapy clinic. However, Isaac remained firm in denying any affair and insisted that he was not involved with Angel. Nevertheless, the situation reached a point where Angel ceased seeing Isaac for physical therapy. Although she vehemently denied any affair with Isaac, tensions continued to rise. In the early hours of August 2nd, 2018, at around 2 a.m., the Sawyer's neighbor is awakened by Angel banging on his door. Upon answering, he notices a wound on Angel's head, and she informs him that someone has broken into their home and that Milton is dead. Panicked, the neighbor immediately dials 911, urgently requesting police assistance. Upon arrival, the police enter the Sawyer household to find chaos, particularly in their room, which has been thoroughly ransacked. Milton's lifeless body is discovered on the bathroom floor, bound with his hands behind his back. Tragically, Milton was already deceased upon their arrival. Angel was taken to a nearby hospital for examination, where they assessed the wound on her head. Fortunately, the injury was not severe, and she was expected to recover well. The initial hypothesis from the medical examiner suggested that Milton's cause of death might have been positional asphyxiation. Given Milton's substantial size and the fact that his hands were tied behind his back while lying on a hard surface, it was theorized that it could have been challenging for him to breathe. The medical examiner leaned towards the possibility that Milton's death was not entirely accidental due to a break-in, but also not necessarily intentional. The theory suggested that the intruder might not have deliberately tried to kill Milton, creating a complex and potentially unintentional outcome. The neighbors provided limited information to investigators, stating they only heard a loud noise during the night and nothing more. Consequently, the investigators decided to interview Angel at the hospital, where she shared a compelling narrative. According to Angel, earlier in the day, a couple had visited their store, the Treasure Hunter, to sell a television. This occurrence wasn't out of the ordinary, as Milton often engaged in somewhat dubious transactions. Angel asserted that she was certain the TV was stolen and had explicitly advised Milton against accepting it. She was aware of the couple's involvement in questionable activities, which fueled her reluctance to acquire the TV. Despite her objections, Milton proceeded to accept the television, leading to a heated argument between him and Angel. The police discovered that there was no evidence of forced entry into the home. Interestingly, they found a key to the back door, conveniently placed on the front porch, leading them to suspect that this was how the intruder gained access. Although they sent the key for fingerprint testing, the results were inconclusive. Angel informed investigators that they kept the key there as a precaution in case one of their children needed to enter the house late at night without disturbing the parents. At the time of the incident, only Angel's 2 daughters lived in the home, and they were both at a friend's house for a sleepover. Thus, only Milton and Angel were home that night. Angel strongly believed that the intruder responsible for Milton's murder was the same individual they had sold the TV to earlier that day, identified as Dylan. Fortunately, Dylan was somewhat familiar to the police. Moreover, Dylan and his girlfriend had been apprehended earlier on the night of the incident due to unrelated prohibited substances. While these charges were unrelated to Milton's murder, it appeared to be a promising lead for the investigators. Dylan was brought in for questioning regarding his whereabouts during the time of Milton's murder. He adamantly denied any involvement, asserting his innocence. According to Angel, the intruder had entered their home around midnight. Dylan countered by stating that he and his girlfriend were not together at that time, but that he was on the phone with her during the murder. Upon obtaining phone records, the police verified Dylan's alibi. He was indeed on the phone with his girlfriend around the time of Milton's murder. Consequently, Dylan and his girlfriend were swiftly ruled out as suspects. The following day, the medical examiner conclusively determined that Milton's cause of death was manual strangulation, dispelling the initial theory of positional asphyxiation. This revelation shifted the focus away from the robbery gone wrong hypothesis, as manual strangulation is a highly personal method of murder. Consequently, investigators began considering alternative possibilities and delving deeper into the case. Turning their attention to Milton's friends and family, investigators uncovered information about an alleged affair between Angel and Isaac Melcher. Friends and family members of Milton stepped to reveal that Milton had been convinced of Angel's affair, despite her vehement denials. Furthermore, those close to Milton described Angel as displaying narcissistic tendencies. They recounted instances where Angel's behavior centered around herself, reflecting a self-absorbed demeanor. It became apparent that Milton's circle harbored reservations towards Angel due to her perceived self-centeredness, contributing to strained relations between Angel and Milton's loved ones. As the investigation progressed, authorities intensified their scrutiny of Isaac Melcher. During their interview with him, Isaac acknowledged that Angel had been a former patient of his, but asserted that he was no longer treating her. He confirmed Milton's belief that they were having an affair, revealing that Milton had confronted him multiple times about the alleged relationship. However, Isaac vehemently denied any involvement with Angel. He also disclosed to the police that he was currently undergoing a separation from his wife. When asked if they could examine his phone, Isaac claimed he no longer had it as it had been damaged beyond repair after a jug of water accidentally spilled on it during the night. He added that he had purchased a new phone around midnight on August 2nd, the same night Milton was murdered. This raised suspicions among investigators, as it seemed convenient that Isaac had lost his phone around the time of the murder, potentially implicating him as a suspect. When confronted with the information regarding Isaac and her potential involvement, Angel's narcissistic tendencies became glaringly apparent. She fixated on her physical appearance, boasting about her attractiveness and how many men desired her. Angel repeatedly asserted her unwavering fidelity to Milton, vehemently denying any extramarital affairs. However, she attempted to deflect suspicion by mentioning other customers of the treasure hunter as possible suspects. Despite following up on these leads, detectives hit dead ends. In an attempt to corroborate Isaac's alibi, police reviewed Walmart security footage for the time he claimed to have been there, but found no trace of him on any surveillance footage. With doubts arising regarding Isaac's whereabouts, authorities obtained a search warrant for his residence and vehicle. On August 8th, when they attempted to execute the search warrant, Isaac's wife informed them that he had traveled to Oregon to visit his mother. This sudden departure during a murder investigation, especially as a person of interest, raised significant suspicion. Isaac's wife cooperated fully with the police, expressing her ignorance regarding any connection Isaac may have had to Milton's murder and denying any awareness of an affair between Isaac and Angel. Despite an extensive search of Isaac's residence and vehicle yielding no evidence linking him to the crime, suspicions lingered regarding the potential involvement of both Angel and Isaac. Investigators redirected their focus towards Angel and sought permission to examine her phone. During this examination, they uncovered messages from a man named Dustin Melcher. It was known to the investigators that Dustin was Isaac's middle name. The investigators discovered a series of affectionate messages between Angel and Dustin Melcher, resembling the communication typical of a romantic relationship. Upon further examination of the messages, investigators noticed communications from Isaac Melcher as well. When questioned about the content of these messages, Angel proceeded to delete them in front of the detectives. When pressed about the deleted messages, Angel claimed that Isaac was simply checking in on her and offering support following Milton's death. The deletion of the messages indeed raised suspicion, as it seemed inconsistent with Angel's explanation that they were merely about her well-being. Despite lacking solid evidence to arrest either Angel or Isaac, a pivotal moment occurred when investigators received a phone call from Oregon that promised to significantly advance the case. The call came from a man named Louis Casimir, who had served as a youth pastor in Oregon where Isaac had grown up. Louis had played a crucial role in mentoring Isaac during his troubled teenage years. Even after Isaac moved on to pursue his education in physical therapy and eventually got married, Louis maintained contact with him through social media, particularly Facebook, to check on his progress. From Louis's perspective, Isaac had made significant strides since his teenage years, and Louis was proud of Isaac's accomplishments and the positive direction his life had taken. The case took a dramatic turn when Isaac, who had recently visited his mother in Oregon, also reached out to Louis Casimir, his former youth pastor. Isaac expressed to Louis that he saw him as a confidant and proceeded to confess to the murder of a man named Milton Sawyer. Isaac divulged to Louis that he had initially taken on Angel Sawyer as a client, maintaining a professional relationship. However, Angel's advances gradually escalated, and Isaac claimed he initially resisted her advances. However, during one appointment, Isaac allegedly found Angel without her top or bra on, and despite his initial hesitation, he succumbed to her advances, sparking an affair. Isaac admitted to Louis that the affair had started as purely physical. As their affair progressed, Isaac's feelings for Angel deepened. Meanwhile, Angel continued to paint a grim picture of her relationship with Milton, alleging that he was jealous, controlling, and abusive towards her. She persistently portrayed Milton in a negative light until Isaac eventually advised her to leave him. She told Isaac that she was unable to leave him because Milton would not let her go unless he was dead. Isaac said he felt kind of protective over Angel, and that's when he and Angel started concocting this plan to murder Milton. They settled on a scheme involving a staged robbery gone wrong as the method to carry out the murder. On the planned night, Angel let Isaac into the house, and initially, Isaac hesitated at the door, uncertain if he could go through with the plan. However, when Angel opened the door, Isaac made the fateful decision to proceed with the murder. He murdered Milton and then proceeded to dispose of the evidence of Milton's murder by cleaning it up in a neighbor's pool and scattering it across various locations in their town to hinder investigators' efforts. With the aim of obtaining direct testimony from Isaac himself, investigators asked Louis to record some of the conversations he had with Isaac. Surprisingly, Isaac's wife was present during these conversations, although she claimed to have been unaware of the affair and Isaac's involvement in the murder until after the fact. Despite this revelation, she chose to stand by Isaac's side and support him, even as he continued his relationship with Angel. This evidence was sufficient for the authorities to finally arrest Isaac for the murder of Milton Sawyer. However, upon his arrest, Isaac refused to cooperate further with investigators and remained silent. Subsequently, investigators brought Angel in for another interview, confronting her with the evidence they had gathered against Isaac. In a surprising turn of events, Angel confessed to having an affair with Isaac, albeit claiming it occurred only a few times. However, she portrayed Isaac as obsessed with her and accused him of stalking her. She attempted to shift the blame onto Isaac, presenting herself as a victim and implying that she should have sought help earlier. Angel claimed she had refrained from contacting investigators out of fear for her safety, asserting that she believed Isaac would harm her and her children if she spoke up. However, this defense proved futile, as Angel was subsequently arrested for her involvement in the crime. In a surprising turn of events, Isaac's attorneys confront him with the truth. Angel is accusing him of being a stalker and obsessed with her, asserting that he is the one responsible for everything. Faced with this revelation, Isaac changes his stance on the matter. Isaac agrees to cooperate with investigators and provide his testimony, ultimately accepting a plea deal for second-degree murder and receiving a 25-year sentence. As part of the plea deal, he agrees to testify against Angel during her trial. Angel is subsequently found guilty, and she receives a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It becomes evident that Angel was the mastermind behind the crime, as there was no financial gain involved. Milton did not own the home they lived in, and while he had a successful business, it wasn't a motive for murder. It's clear that the crime wasn't financially motivated, leading investigators to believe that Angel felt trapped in her marriage and no longer loved Milton. Instead of divorcing him, she chose to commit murder. On September 8, 2004, a Wednesday, marked Jay Orbin's 45th birthday. At this stage in his life, Jay possessed nearly all he desired. He ran his own business that demanded travel across various states, had sufficient financial stability for a comfortable life, and cherished his loving family. Jay resided in Phoenix, Arizona, alongside his wife, Marjorie Orbin, and their beloved 8-year-old son, Noah. However, not everything appeared as flawless as it seemed. Jay and Marjorie had officially ended their marriage, yet continued cohabitating as if still husband and wife. Marjorie asserted that they divorced solely for tax purposes. Despite their shared living arrangements, Marjorie engaged in multiple extramarital affairs. Jay recognized early on that Marjorie presented a formidable challenge. Their initial encounter transpired at a strip club where Marjorie worked as a dancer, a venue Jay frequented. He became infatuated with her, frequently arranging private dances, yearning for a deeper connection. Eventually, Marjorie acquiesced to dating him. However, Jay's affections weren't sufficient for Marjorie. She harbored aspirations of grandeur, longing for fame and fortune. Having been exposed to the opulent lifestyle in Las Vegas, she coveted a similar existence, yearning to see her name illuminated in bright lights among the elite of society. Marjorie yearned for a jet-set lifestyle, craving an endless stream of wealth and glamour. When Jay, then 26, crossed paths with Marjorie, He was in the midst of building his career, but his progress didn't meet Marjorie's impatient ambitions. Despite finding Jay kind, humorous, and possessing a good character, Marjorie desired more. Consequently, she relocated to Florida, where she had lived previously. In Florida, Marjorie entered into a relationship with Michael J. Peter, a multimillionaire renowned for establishing high-end strip clubs globally. Michael could fulfill Marjorie's every material desire. However, although Marjorie may have found contentment with Michael, he sought satisfaction elsewhere, engaging in affairs with women resembling Marjorie. Following the dissolution of her relationship with Michael, Marjorie returned to Las Vegas. In 1993, Jay Orbin reached out to her after a decade of separation. Spotting a billboard featuring Marjorie during a business trip through Las Vegas, Jay impulsively contacted her, proposing a drink. Marjorie accepted. By that time, Marjorie had gone through 7 marriages. During their reunion, Marjorie and Jay spent the entire night conversing and reminiscing. Jay's visit to Las Vegas was brief, as he had to return to Phoenix the next day for work. Despite the distance, they maintained communication. Jay, now the proprietor of a highly successful Native American arts enterprise, had achieved greater stability since their initial encounter. Shortly thereafter, they tied the knot at the Little White Wedding Chapel on Las Vegas Boulevard. For several years, married life was harmonious. Marjorie assumed the role of homemaker, diligently attending to household chores while Jay dedicated himself to his work. His earnings enabled them to pursue fertility treatments, a pursuit driven by their mutual longing for a child. Despite being informed at the age of 18 that she couldn't conceive, both Marjorie and Jay remained determined. Their perseverance paid off when Marjorie successfully conceived after undergoing fertility treatment. She gave birth to a baby boy, whom they lovingly named Noah. On August 26, 2004, Jay and Marjorie joyously commemorated Noah's 8th birthday, surrounded by friends and family. However, a few days following the celebration, Jay embarked on a business trip to Florida. He soon had to abandon the journey as Hurricane Francis posed a significant threat to safety. On September 8, 2004, Joanne Orbin dialed her son Jay's number to extend birthday wishes. Jay informed her that he was en route to Phoenix and promised to call her later that evening. However, the anticipated call never came. As subsequent days passed without any communication from Jay, Joanne grew increasingly concerned. Despite her efforts to reach him, she was unable to make contact. A week elapsed, amplifying Joanne's apprehension, yet Marjorie remained steadfast in reassuring her that Jay was simply away on another business engagement. However, Joanne found little solace in this explanation, as Jay typically maintained communication even while traveling. With another week passing and still no word from Jay, his family and friends implored Marjorie to report him missing. Reluctantly, Marjorie complied and informed the authorities that Jay had returned to Phoenix from Florida before embarking on yet another trip. When the police requested routine information such as Jay's license plate number to aid in their search, Marjorie promised to provide the details but failed to follow through promptly. After multiple attempts, the police finally managed to connect with her, and their conversation was documented by the detective handling the case. During Jay's absence, Marjorie took the drastic step of inviting her boyfriend, Larry Weisberg, to move into their residence. Larry began using some of Jay's closet space for his own belongings. Shockingly, Marjorie not only refrained from participating in the search for Jay, but also failed to cooperate with the police investigation. Instead, she indulged in extravagant purchases, acquiring a $12,000 baby grand piano and withdrawing $45,000 from Jay's business account. Marjorie's conspicuous behavior, coupled with her unwillingness to aid in the search, raised suspicions among law enforcement officers. Concerned that they might be dealing with more than a simple missing person case, they obtained a warrant to search the Orbin household. Inside, they uncovered Jay's credit cards and business checkbook, items he typically carried when traveling for business. The discovery of Jay's belongings within the house, combined with his documented return to Phoenix from Florida, led authorities to reclassify the investigation. No longer treating it as a missing person case, they shifted their focus to a homicide inquiry. On October 23, 2004, a homeless individual stumbled upon a container wrapped in thick black plastic in North Phoenix. Upon opening it, the individual made a grisly discovery: a human torso. The authorities were promptly notified. Upon examination of the 50-gallon Rubbermaid container, authorities uncovered a disturbing scene: a torso, a bundle of cash, and a solitary spent bullet. Notably, all internal organs and intestines were conspicuously absent. Forensic analysis indicated that the body had been frozen post-mortem and subsequently dismembered using a saw. Despite an extensive search, no other body parts were recovered, prompting authorities to resort to DNA testing for victim identification. Tragically, the victim was confirmed to be J. Orbin. The medical examiner's report cited the cause of death as an undetermined homicide. Just 3 weeks following the discovery of Jay's dismembered remains, Marjorie was apprehended for forging his signature at a Circuit City store. During a police interview conducted on December 6th, 6 weeks after the grisly discovery, Marjorie faced charges of first-degree murder, along with 2 counts each of theft and fraudulent schemes and artifices. The prosecution contended that Marjorie orchestrated Jay's murder on September 8, 2004, driven by a desire to remove him from her life and seize control of his finances. This motive, they argued, was evidenced by her calculated decision to dispose of his torso in close proximity to their residence, with the intention of facilitating a substantial life insurance payout and gaining access to Jay's estate. The prosecution presented their narrative to the court, alleging that Marjorie Orbin shot Jay in the garage of their residence, subsequently freezing his body before dismembering it with 2 jigsaw blades. This conclusion was drawn from the consistency of the cuts observed on Jay's tibia and vertebrae, indicative of a jigsaw blade's usage. Following Jay's demise, the prosecution asserted that Marjorie meticulously cleaned the garage to eliminate any evidence of the crime. Police discovered receipts for mops and cleaning supplies purchased a mere day after Jay's disappearance, suggesting a concerted effort to sanitize the crime scene. They contended that Marjorie likely utilized acid to cleanse the garage floor before applying an epoxy coating, effectively eradicating any traces of blood. Continuing their case, the prosecution alleged that Marjorie procured a Rubbermaid container to house Jay's torso. Surveillance footage from a Lowe's hardware store depicted Marjorie purchasing 2 containers just 2 days after Jay's initial disappearance, using his credit card for the transaction. During the trial, the prosecution summoned Sophia Johnson, Marjorie's former cellmate, to the stand. Sophia recounted Marjorie's disparaging remarks about Jay, characterizing him as fat and disgusting. She claimed that Marjorie confessed to the crime, stating, I did it, and divulging details of Jay's demise. He was shot, frozen, thawed, and dismembered, with his limbs and head severed. To bolster their case, the prosecution granted Larry Weisberg use immunity in exchange for his testimony against Marjorie. Larry asserted his lack of involvement in Jay's disappearance, denying any knowledge of the events. In contrast, the defense posited an alternative theory, alleging Larry Weisberg as the perpetrator of Jay's murder. They pointed to evidence found during a search of Larry's residence, which included a remote allowing access to the Orbins' garage. The defense contended that Larry could have used this remote to enter the garage, where he potentially shot Jay. Ultimately, the jury delivered a guilty verdict against Marjorie. She was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder, along with 2 counts of theft exceeding $100,000 and 2 counts of fraudulent schemes and artifices. Marjorie received a sentence of natural life imprisonment for the murder charge, along with concurrent terms of 5 years imprisonment for each additional count. Marjorie revealed to 48 Hours that she harbors regret for not testifying during her trial. She asserted that it was Larry who committed the act of killing Jay, while she merely played a role in concealing the crime. According to Marjorie's account, a confrontation ensued between Jay and Larry in the garage unexpectedly, as Jay arrived home at an unforeseen moment and encountered Larry entering the house. This encounter escalated into a confrontation, culminating in gunshots and Jay's subsequent demise. Marjorie maintained that she never laid eyes on Jay's body. Furthermore, Marjorie vehemently denied any involvement in dismembering Jay's body, attributing this gruesome task solely to Larry, who subsequently disposed of the remains. Following Marjorie's murder conviction, Jay's brother Jake was granted custody of Noah, Jay, and Marjorie's son. On August 24, 2011, a Wednesday, Michelle Despain was at her workplace. However, she informed her colleagues that she needed to leave in the afternoon to attend to some bills at home. Michelle resided in Jonesboro, Arkansas, United States, with her 34-year-old husband, Mark Despain. Having been married for 15 years, they shared 2 young sons, and Michelle also had a teenage daughter from a previous relationship, whom Mark loved and helped raise. Despite their current affluent lifestyle, their beginnings were humble. When they first met at the ages of 18 and 19, Mark's parents, Tana and Jack Despain, assisted them by providing a trailer to live in, and Mark worked for the family real estate business. After a few years, Mark ventured into his own business as a property investor and real estate appraiser, achieving significant success and wealth. This success allowed them to transition from their initial trailer to a luxurious home with a swimming pool. Mark and Michelle worked diligently to provide their children with everything they desired, including frequent vacations to destinations like Jamaica and Cancun each year. Michelle played a crucial role in Mark's company by handling the bookkeeping, and she also held a position at the local bank. On the 24th of August, after finishing her work at the bank around 3 p.m., Michelle returned home to find the rear door unlocked. To her dismay, the entire house had been subjected to a thorough ransacking. Drawers were left open, belongings strewn across the floor, and broken glass was scattered throughout. The chaos extended to the bathtub, where clothes had been haphazardly thrown, and the bedroom, where a jewelry box had been opened. As Michelle traversed through the disarray, she made a heartbreaking discovery. Mark's lifeless body lay on the kitchen floor, a victim of a fatal gunshot. Overwhelmed with fear, Michelle rushed outside and promptly called 911, expressing her concern for her own safety. Upon the police's arrival, the initial belief was that they were dealing with a burglary gone awry. However, a more in-depth investigation raised suspicions about the circumstances surrounding the incident. Upon scrutinizing the items left behind, the police began to doubt the conventional burglary narrative, noting that many valuable possessions remained untouched in the residence. The peculiar circumstances surrounding Mark's demise further fueled their suspicions. His fatal injuries included a gunshot wound to the left side of his chest and another to his head, both inflicted at close range. The police leaned towards the conclusion that the incident was a premeditated attack. According to their theory, when Mark returned home that day, he entered the kitchen, placed an ice cream container on the counter, and someone approached from behind, shooting him twice. This led investigators to believe that the assailant was already inside the house when Mark arrived. The prevailing notion was that the intruder's intent was not theft, but rather a targeted assassination of Mark. The perplexing question remained: why would someone want to kill him? During their investigation, the police interviewed all the neighbors on the street and learned that an unfamiliar African-American man had been seen in the vicinity on the day of the incident. Additionally, there were reports of a blue Mercedes car observed circling the neighborhood. As part of their efforts, the police sought to determine whether Mark had any known adversaries. Some individuals described him as a driven and ambitious man with a reputation for being ruthless. In retracing Mark's movements, the police encountered a significant puzzle. Mark wasn't expected to be at home during that particular time on that day. This raised a crucial question. How could someone with malicious intent have known that Mark would be at home precisely during that time frame. The discrepancy between Mark's unexpected presence at home and the apparent premeditation of the attack added complexity to the investigation. On that fateful day, Michelle informed the police that she had lunch with Mark at a nearby place close to her workplace. She returned to the office by 1:30 p.m., left again after 2:30 p.m. to retrieve the bills, and discovered the disturbing scene at home. Upon arriving, she noticed the absence of lights, and upon walking through the house, found Mark in a pool of blood. In a state of terror, she shook his leg, called his name, and then ran out of the house to dial 911, fearing the possible presence of an intruder. Unable to get assistance from a neighbor, she reached out to her mother, Kathy. When Kathy arrived, Michelle was waiting outside her own residence. During the police inquiry into potential motives, Michelle pointed to Mark's own father, Jack, as someone who might harbor ill will towards him. Mark had previously worked with his parents, Jack and Tana, but a disagreement led Mark to start his own business. The rift arose when Mark sought a larger share of the profits, and Jack opposed the idea. Michelle revealed to the police that Jack had a cold-hearted demeanor, and there had been past trouble involving an incident between Jack and her 13-year-old daughter. Michelle's father, Carl Kelly, who worked as the rent collector in Mark's company, also expressed suspicion, claiming to have heard threats from Jack in the past. When the police questioned Jack and Tana, they acknowledged the estrangement, but contended that the dispute over money stemmed from Michelle's desire for more. Jack suggested that the police scrutinize Michelle's activities on the day of his son's death, implying her potential involvement. According to Jack, Mark returned home that day to retrieve a hunting bow, and Michelle would have been the sole person aware of his presence. Jack provided the police with details about the incident Michelle had referenced, involving her daughter and explicit photos on his phone. Initially accused of taking the photos, Jack's relationship with Tana faced strain, leading to a brief separation. However, further investigation revealed a different narrative. Jack explained to the police that Michelle's daughter had been involved in adult chat with her boyfriend, and Jack discovered the compromising photos on his phone. In a bid to avoid facing consequences from her parents, she falsely claimed that Jack had taken the photos, leading to accusations of child abuse against him. Although no charges were filed, the false accusations caused significant distress for Jack. Tana reconciled with Jack upon learning the complete details of the situation. The police, after checking Jack's alibi, cleared him as a suspect in his son's murder. With Jack no longer under suspicion, the investigation expanded. Despite appearances of a content life for Michelle and Mark, the question lingered. If Michelle was somehow involved, as suggested by Jack, what could be her motive for wanting him dead? The police swiftly discovered that Michelle was far from the grieving widow they initially perceived. Prior to Mark's death, Michelle had engaged in an affair with a much younger colleague, a 24-year-old man whom she financially supported, covering his rent, groceries, and other expenses. When questioned by the police, Michelle asserted that Mark was unaware of the affair, and when asked if Mark had ever requested a divorce, she denied such discussions. However, Michelle did confirm that Mark had expressed doubts about the future of their relationship once the children had left home. Another revelation unfolded as the police delved into the couple's financial situation. Mark and Michelle were burdened with a substantial amount of debt, and there were allegations that Michelle might have been siphoning funds from the business account. Furthermore, Michelle was set to receive $1 million from 2 life insurance policies in the event of Mark's demise. Despite these suspicions, the police lacked concrete evidence against Michelle or any other potential suspects. Surveillance footage from the bank where Michelle worked provided an alibi, confirming that she was with her father, Carl, at the time of Mark's murder. The trajectory of the investigation took a turn when an anonymous tip reached the police. The informant revealed that a man named Terrence Barker had been boasting about committing the murder of Mark. This new lead marked a significant development in the case, prompting the police to explore the potential involvement of Terrence Barker in Mark's death. As the police questioned Terrence Barker at the station, he initially denied any involvement in Mark's death. However, the evidence against him was compelling. Eyewitness reports and cell tower records placed him in close proximity to Mark's home, and he was spotted in a blue Mercedes just before the fatal shooting occurred. Confronted with this evidence, Terrence eventually confessed to being the perpetrator, revealing that he had agreed to shoot Mark for a promised payment ranging between $7,000 to $10,000, though he had not yet received any money. Further investigation led the police to Johnny Hubbard, the driver of the blue Mercedes. Now the question arose, why would someone want Mark dead? The intricate details of the investigation began to unfold as Johnny Hubbard, who was known to Mark as one of his tenants, informed the police that it was Michelle's father, Carl Kelly, who had approached him about orchestrating Mark's murder. The involvement of Terrence Barker came about when Johnny proposed the opportunity to make some money, leading them to meet Carl in a church parking lot to discuss the plan. Terrence agreed to carry out the shooting, claiming that he had no prior knowledge of Mark and had never seen him before. According to Terrence's account, Carl provided him with the firearm used in the murder, showed him Mark's residence, and instructed him on where to lie in wait. However, Terrence alleged that Michelle was also implicated in the plot. He told the police that Michelle was giving instructions to her father, sending multiple text messages. One message, sent on the day of the murder at 8:20 a.m., read, "Has to be today. Can't live like this. Awful this morning." Carl replied, "Okay, can you get him to lunch?" With this information, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place for the police. They theorized that Michelle orchestrated the lunch meeting with Mark, providing Carl the opportunity to get Terrence inside the house. Michelle's text messages suggested she was aware of the plan and indicated that the murder needed to occur that day. The police now believed that Michelle feigned shock when discovering Mark's body, although she already knew what awaited her at home. This explained her lack of attempt to assist Mark when she found him fatally injured in the kitchen. She was already aware of his demise before returning home. Phone records revealed that Michelle and Carl exchanged numerous text messages on the day of the murder, most of which were promptly deleted. Additionally, the records indicated that Mark initially declined Michelle's invitation for lunch, but she insisted, and she also insisted on going for ice cream afterward. During their ice cream outing, Michelle maintained constant communication with her father via text messages. Initially, Michelle denied any involvement, later changing her story to claim knowledge of her father's involvement only after Mark's demise. Terrence Barker pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, receiving a 35-year prison sentence. Similarly, Carl Kelly pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Johnny Hubbard pleaded guilty to hindering apprehension and the revocation of probation from a prior prohibited substances charge, earning an 18-year prison sentence, along with an additional 20 years for violating probation on a previous prohibited substances conviction. Michelle Despain admitted guilt to a reduced charge of hindering apprehension and received a 30-year prison sentence, with the chance of parole after 5 years. In a negotiated plea, she pleaded guilty to 3 counts of hindering the apprehension and prosecution of capital murder, avoiding a capital murder charge. As part of the plea agreement, she waived her right to appeal. Fearing a potential not guilty verdict if Michelle went to trial for Mark's murder, Mark's parents accepted the deal to ensure she served some prison time. On the 16th of December 2000, a Saturday, Jerry Michael "Mike" Williams, a 31-year-old man, embarked on a duck hunting expedition to Lake Seminole in Jackson County, Florida, United States. Jerry Michael Williams, known as Mike, had his roots in Bradfordville, located north of Tallahassee. Raised in a double-wide trailer by his parents, a Greyhound bus driver and a daycare provider, Mike and his older brother Nick attended North Florida Christian High School thanks to their parents' diligent savings. The brothers worked night shifts at supermarkets to support their education. Mike thrived at North Florida Christian, serving as the student council president, participating in football and being active in the Key Club. His passion for duck hunting began at the age of 15, and during this time, he became acquainted with fellow student Denise Merrill. After graduating from North Florida Christian, Mike pursued a major in political science and urban planning at Florida State University. Even before graduation, he secured a position as a property appraiser at Ketchum Appraisal Group. His income reached $200,000. After marrying Denise in 1994, the couple bought a home in an upscale subdivision on the east side of the city. In 1999, Mike and Denise welcomed their only child, a daughter, into the world. Colleagues noted Mike's dedication to both his work and his daughter. Recently, they had discussed plans to expand their family. Mike, employed as a real estate appraiser, enjoyed spending his leisure time on the boat. That specific Saturday, Mike assured Denise that he would return in time for their planned vacation to Apalachicola, Florida, to commemorate their 6th wedding anniversary. Concerned when she didn't hear from him by noon, Denise contacted friends to assist in the search for Mike, who had gone duck hunting alone. Several individuals joined the search around Lake Seminole. Mike's close friend, Brian Winchester, received a call from his father informing him of Mike's disappearance. Brian and his father ventured to the lake with their boat to aid in the search. Approximately 75 yards away, they discovered Mike's Ford Bronco, seemingly parked, but there was no sign of Mike in the vicinity. The initial inquiry into the disappearance was conducted by the FFWCC, who treated it as a missing hunter case based on the report they received. Their approach focused on search and rescue or recovery, given the limited information available, an empty boat, and the absence of the individual. Search efforts concentrated on the 10-acre area around the lake cove where Williams's truck was parked. A helicopter pilot discovered his boat about 225 feet from the ramp, initially mistaking it for a search vessel. Upon retrieval, investigators found Williams's shotgun in its case, but Williams himself was not located. Local belief suggested that the cove, known as Stump Field, was once an orchard before the lake's creation through damming. The area was characterized by numerous stumps above and below the water surface, requiring cautious navigation for powerboats. The assumption was that Williams had collided with a stump, fallen into the water, and drowned when unable to free himself. If Williams had indeed drowned accidentally after falling from his boat, it would be an anomaly among the 80 recorded deaths in the lake, as his body remained undiscovered. A suggestion arose that Williams's body might have become entangled in the dense hydrilla beds beneath the lake's surface, only to be discovered later by alligators with turtles and catfish completing the decomposition process. Denise Williams, who had kept a low profile during the search for her husband, eventually accepted his death and organized a memorial service for him the day after the search concluded. In June, an angler in the Stump Field area found a pair of waders floating in the lake. Subsequent diving operations recovered a lightweight hunting jacket and a flashlight from the lake bottom. The jacket's pocket contained a hunting license with Williams's name and signature. Despite these findings, there was no trace of Mike. Initially, authorities speculated that he may have drowned, anticipating his body to surface in a few days. However, this expectation did not materialize. The presence of alligators in the lake raised the possibility that Mike might have been consumed by them. With no concrete evidence of his fate, the case was initially treated as a missing person investigation and remained so until 2010. 6 months after Mike's disappearance, Denise sought the declaration of his death from Leon Circuit Judge John Crusoe, who granted her request. Despite this legal declaration, Mike's mother, Cheryl Williams, harbored doubts about her son's fate. She adamantly believed he was alive and took it upon herself to challenge the investigation's closure. Cheryl conducted her own investigation, tirelessly pursuing leads, cross-checking information, and uncovering new angles to her son's disappearance. Cheryl's relentless efforts eventually led to a re-evaluation of the case in 2010, with law enforcement classifying Mike's disappearance as a suspicious death. A team of cold case investigators revisited the matter, largely influenced by Cheryl's findings and additional information that had surfaced since Mike went missing. It came to light that Denise had received a substantial $1.75 million life insurance payout after Mike's disappearance. Adding to the complexity, in 2005, Denise married Mike's best friend, Brian Winchester, raising further questions about the circumstances surrounding Mike's vanishing. Upon reviewing the details of the initial investigation, the cold case team found several troubling aspects. When Mike's boat was recovered, its engine was turned off despite having a full gas tank. The manufacturer indicated that if Mike had fallen out of the boat while the engine was running, as initially believed by the police, it should have remained on until the fuel was depleted. The fact that the engine was off, coupled with a full tank, suggested intentional shutdown. Furthermore, investigators uncovered that Mike's decision to go to the lake alone that day was out of the ordinary, as he typically did not hunt solo. Additionally, his truck was parked in an impractical location, requiring him to drag his boat through mud, even though a nearby concrete boat ramp was available. Mike's waders, hunting jacket, and flashlight were discovered at the lake's bottom after he was reported missing, lodged among torn weeds and alligator excrement. However, the cold case investigators, approaching the case with a fresh perspective, entertained the possibility that these items might have been deliberately placed there to bolster the theory of Mike drowning and being consumed by alligators. Reptile experts supported this skepticism, noting that North Florida alligators are less active in winter due to colder temperatures and wouldn't typically consume a full-grown man without leaving noticeable evidence. Despite suspicions that Mike's disappearance might involve foul play, the lack of physical evidence or DNA linking anyone to the incident kept the case unresolved for years. It wasn't until 2016 that crucial details emerged, providing a breakthrough for the police investigation. Denise and Brian had separated, and Denise initiated divorce proceedings, signaling an end to their relationship. However, a significant incident brought matters to a head. On the 5th of August 2016, at 2:30 a.m., Brian concealed himself in the trunk of Denise's SUV, brandishing a gun when she opened it. Only after Denise promised to stay with him did Brian calm down. Subsequently, Denise promptly reported the incident to the police as a kidnapping. During Brian's arrest and subsequent questioning regarding the kidnapping report, he divulged details related to Mike's disappearance. Brian confessed that on the day Mike was reported missing, December 16th, he was with him on the lake and knew exactly what transpired. He had shot Mike. Prosecutors, recognizing Denise's potential involvement in Mike's death, offered Brian a plea deal. Given the lack of evidence against Denise, they understood that securing a conviction would be challenging without Brian's testimony. Brian accepted the plea agreement, securing immunity for Mike's murder in exchange for his testimony at Denise's trial. Consequently, he received a 20-year prison sentence, primarily for the kidnapping charge. Brian cooperated with authorities, leading them to the location where Mike's body was discovered along the shores of Carr Lake in Leon County, revealing that Mike had been shot in the head. Denise Williams faced charges of conspiracy to commit murder, first-degree murder, and being an accessory after the fact. According to the prosecution, the events unfolded on December 16, 2000, when Mike was shot and killed on the lake. While Brian was identified as the one who physically carried out the shooting, the prosecution argued that it was the result of a premeditated plan devised by both Brian and Denise. The prosecution alleged that Brian and Denise were having an affair at the time and conspired to eliminate Mike so they could be together and claim nearly $2 million in life insurance money. The court heard that Denise and Mike, high school sweethearts, were friends with another couple, Kathy and Brian Winchester, who were also high school sweethearts. Despite Denise and Brian being married to different people, they engaged in an affair, and the prosecution contended that this extramarital relationship played a pivotal role in the plot leading to Mike's murder. Brian served as the key witness for the prosecution, detailing the inception and progression of his affair with Denise. According to his testimony, the affair began at a Sister Hazel concert in 1997. While Kathy and Mike were outside parking the car, Brian and Denise shared a kiss inside the venue, marking the commencement of a clandestine relationship that endured for several years. The affair included vacations, lunch meetings during work hours, and visits to each other's homes when they were alone. Brian recounted that the idea to eliminate Mike originated during a hunting trip they took together. Mike fell into a mud hole, and Brian assisted him in getting out. After this incident, Brian shared the experience with Denise, emphasizing that if he hadn't been there to help, Mike might not have survived. The ground had collapsed beneath Mike, behaving like quicksand and pulling him down. Brian suggested that if he hadn't witnessed or aided in the situation, the fate of Mike would have remained unknown. Brian stated that the initial conversation marked the commencement of several discussions with Denise regarding potential ways to eliminate Mike. According to Brian's testimony, Denise, driven by personal beliefs, was averse to pursuing a divorce and sharing custody of her daughter with Mike. Together, they contemplated various methods to end Mike's life, with a focus on ensuring financial gain through insurance. During one discussion, Brian recounted that they considered orchestrating a boating accident involving Mike. However, a week before the planned murder, Denise hesitated and expressed reluctance. Nevertheless, a week later, on December 16th, Brian informed the court that Denise encouraged Mike to go hunting. Brian detailed that he lured Mike to a specific location near the lake, where, upon standing up in the boat, Brian pushed him overboard. The original intent was for Mike to drown, but he managed to cling to a tree stump. In an attempt to ensure the plan's success, Brian, armed with a 12-gauge shotgun, approached the stump. Despite Mike's plea for help, Brian shot him in the face at close range, approximately 3 feet away. After removing Mike's body from the lake, Brian concealed it under a tarp in his car and drove home. To divert suspicion, he deliberately left Mike's boat on the lake, creating the impression of an accidental incident. On the morning of December 16th, Brian, still carrying Mike's body, headed to a familiar hunting spot near Carr Lake, making a stop at Walmart en route to purchase a shovel and weights. Upon reaching Carr Lake, Brian located a mud hole where he concealed Mike's body, using the weights to submerge it. Brian and Denise, intent on keeping their affair discreet, continued dating other people after Mike was reported missing to avoid raising suspicions. However, shortly thereafter, Brian and Kathy divorced, and in 2005, Brian married Denise. Brian testified that paranoia set in after he and Denise got married, as they believed they were under scrutiny. The turning point occurred when Brian was summoned for questioning during the reopening of Mike's case. It became evident during that interview that they not only harbored suspicions about the incident, but were also dubious about me and Denise. The court learned that Denise received $1.75 million from Mike's life insurance policies, one of which Brian, as an insurance agent, had written. A document presented to the jury revealed that Denise filed an insurance claim just 19 days after her husband's disappearance. Recorded calls between Kathy and Denise were presented to the jury, wherein Kathy accused Denise of involvement in Mike's murder. Despite Denise changing the subject, the prosecution urged the jury to take note of her lack of denial. It's not about what she said, it's about what she didn't say. The prosecution implored the jury to rely on their common sense in determining Denise's guilt or innocence. The defense argued that Denise played no part in Brian's plan to kill Mike, emphasizing that the decision and execution were solely Brian's responsibility. Denise's lawyer asserted to the jury that the sole accuser implicating Denise in the conspiracy was Brian himself. He reminded them of Brian's confessed killing and conviction for kidnapping, highlighting his potential motive to deceive. He has every motive to lie to you. The lawyer presented the central question for the jury to decide whether they believed Brian's testimony. Ultimately, after deliberating for less than a day, the jury found Denise guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, first-degree murder, and being an accessory after the fact. As a result, Denise was sentenced to life in prison. Denise appealed her conviction, and an appeals court took the step of reversing her conviction on the first-degree murder charge. The court pointed to the fact that, under Florida law, defendants can be charged with a crime even if they were not actually or constructively present at the commission of such offense. However, the appeals court overturned this part of the verdict, citing the state's failure to present competent and substantial evidence to establish that Denise was a principal to murder under state law. Her only ostensibly culpable conduct, for example, consideration of ways to kill Mike, development of an alibi agreeing to encourage Mike to go hunting with Brian, did not constitute commanding or impelling Brian to commit the murder or the assisting or encouraging of Brian at the time he actually was committing the offense. Essentially, the court ruled that the state failed to provide sufficient evidence to prove that Denise actively assisted Brian in committing the crime. Despite her involvement in pre-murder discussions and urging Mike to go hunting on the day he was killed, the court deemed this insufficient to meet the high standard required to establish her as a principal in the crime. Because Denise did not do or say anything to aid or abet Brian in the murder of Mike, as those terms originally were understood to mean, and she did not counsel, hire, or procure Mike's murder beforehand, that is, she did not get the ball rolling, we reverse her conviction as a principal to first-degree murder. However, her conviction on another charge, conspiracy to commit murder, was upheld. Consequently, the sentence for that part of the crime remained intact, and Denise would serve the 30-year prison sentence. Mike's mother, Cheryl, expressed her distress upon hearing the news. "I am sick. I am literally ill. It's like nobody is responsible for Mike's murder." Kristin Rossum, born on October 25, 1975 in Tennessee, USA, grew up in California and Virginia, as her family frequently moved due to her father's job. She had 2 siblings, and during her early teens, Kristin attended an all-girls boarding school where she started engaging in behaviors like drinking beer and smoking cigarettes. By the age of 17, in 1992, Kristin was already using methamphetamine. In 1994, she enrolled in a university, attempting to break free from prohibited substances use. However, after experiencing a relapse, she dropped out and relocated to San Diego. The course of her life changed in 1995 when she met Gregory DeVillers. It appeared that she had overcome her struggles with prohibited substances and was on the path to starting a family. Kristin and Gregory married in 1999 after she graduated with honors from San Diego State University in 1998. She pursued a career as a toxicologist, working in the city's medical examiner's office. Despite early challenges, it seemed that Kristin had successfully turned her life around and was enjoying a positive trajectory. However, not everything ends with a happy ending. On the 6th day of November in the year 2000, which happened to be a Monday, a 25-year-old woman named Kristin Rossum made a distress call to 911 at 9:22 p.m. from her residence in San Diego, California, situated in the United States. In her call, she reported that her 26-year-old husband, Gregory DeVillers, was not breathing and had allegedly taken his own life. The emergency dispatcher advised Kristin to perform CPR, but unfortunately, despite her efforts and the subsequent arrival of paramedics and police, Gregory was pronounced dead. Kristin and Gregory had been married for a relatively short period of 17 months. According to Kristin's account to the police on that evening, Gregory appeared somewhat drowsy, which she attributed to the effects of cold medication. Kristin further explained that she took a bath, and upon exiting, she discovered Gregory lying on the bed without signs of breathing. The police found the scene puzzling, as Gregory was located on the bedroom floor amidst scattered rose petals. A wedding photo was near his pillow, and crumpled diary pages belonging to Kristin were strewn on the floor. Kristin claimed that she moved Gregory to the floor in order to perform CPR. The police drew a comparison to a scene from the movie American Beauty due to the peculiar aspects of the situation. Initially, when the paramedics first arrived, Kristin informed them that her husband Gregory had not taken any drugs. However, later on, she changed her statement and mentioned that he might have ingested oxycodone. Upon their arrival at the hospital, Kristin conveyed to a nurse her suspicion that Gregory could have overdosed on oxycodone. The police, in their investigation, explored the possibility that Gregory's death might have resulted from an accidental overdose involving a combination of cold medicines and oxycodone. In their discussions with Kristin, they learned that Gregory was distressed, indicating that their marriage seemed to be on the rocks. This led Kristin to initially suggest to the police that he had taken his own life, an avenue of inquiry they also pursued. According to Kristin's account, the scattered rose petals surrounding Gregory's body were remnants from a bouquet he had gifted her for her birthday on October 25th. She believed that the use of these petals symbolized the end of their marriage, with one surviving rose being the source. Gregory's family, as well as others on the night his body was discovered, expressed skepticism about the notion of suicide. On November 8th, a significant turn in the investigation occurred when one of Kristin's co-workers, Russ Lowe, contacted the police. He revealed that Kristin was engaged in an extramarital affair with her manager, altering the trajectory of the police inquiry. Gregory first crossed paths in 1995, ultimately tying the knot in 1999. Kristin, initially struggling with methamphetamine abuse, turned her life around with Gregory's support and graduated with top honors in biochemistry. She secured a position as a toxicologist at the San Diego County Office of the Medical Examiner, OME, in March 2000. Meanwhile, Gregory pursued a career in the biotech industry. Shortly after Kristin commenced her employment at the OME, Michael Robertson, an Australian citizen, assumed the role of forensic laboratory manager, replacing Russ Lowe. Russ, who had been serving as the acting laboratory manager, had a lengthy tenure at the OME. The decision to appoint Michael instead of Russ to the permanent position generated tension within the laboratory environment. The atmosphere became even more strained when it became known among employees that Kristin and Michael, both of whom were married, were engaged in an extramarital affair. Concerns arose among some employees about the possibility of preferential treatment for Kristin. In October 2000, a few months after these revelations, Kristin resumed using methamphetamine. Police investigations revealed that on November 2, 2000, just 4 days prior to Gregory's discovery dead, he confronted Kristin about her prohibited substances use and his suspicion of her affair. Gregory insisted that she resign from the OME and threatened to expose her prohibited substances use and the affair to her employer if she refused. Following Gregory's death, an autopsy was conducted, including toxicology tests. Dr. Blackburn, the medical examiner, determined that Gregory died from acute fentanyl intoxication. Toxicology results indicated extremely elevated levels of fentanyl, along with smaller amounts of clonazepam and trace levels of oxycodone in Gregory's autopsy specimens. When questioned about the source of the fentanyl, Kristin claimed ignorance. However, the police were aware that, due to her role as a toxicologist, Kristin had access to fentanyl. The police theorized that Kristin may have secretly administered the fentanyl to Gregory, leading to his poisoning. They constructed a case based on the medical and toxicological evidence. Subsequently, Kristin was charged with first-degree murder, to which she pleaded not guilty. During the trial, Kristin's parents, Ralph Rossum and Claremont McKenna, went to great lengths to secure her $1.25 million bail by mortgaging their home. However, this financial commitment left them unable to afford a private attorney. Consequently, the court appointed a public defender to represent Kristin. The prosecution asserted that Kristin murdered Gregory because he threatened to expose her prohibited substances use and affair with Michael Robertson to her employer. According to the prosecution, Kristin allegedly poisoned Gregory with fentanyl, a potent synthetic opiate that is 80 times stronger than morphine. They suggested that she may have initially attempted to harm him with clonazepam, but when that failed, she resorted to using fentanyl. The prosecution further claimed that Kristin staged the bedroom to simulate a suicide, tearing pages from her diary and strategically placing petals and a wedding photo around Gregory's body. The court learned that Kristin, holding a degree in biochemistry, allegedly utilized her knowledge of prohibited substances and chemistry to carry out the poisoning. The prosecution argued that Kristin aimed to persuade her colleagues at the medical examiner's office, where she worked, that Gregory's death was a suicide. However, due to a conflict of interest, the case was transferred to another laboratory to conduct the toxicology tests, as it was normally the responsibility of the medical examiner's office to determine the cause of death in unusual cases. The prosecution described Kristin's activities on the 6th of November to the jury. In the morning, she informed Gregory's employer about his absence and then went to work. Her co-workers stated that an hour after arriving at work around 9 a.m., she was observed crying in Michael's office. The apartment complex manager, where Kristin and Gregory resided, testified that she returned to her apartment at 12:10 p.m., seen rushing inside. Later, at 12:41 p.m., she visited a local grocery store and bought a few items. In the hours leading up to Gregory's demise, she made multiple calls to Michael. Rose petals were discovered around Gregory's body, with Kristin attributing them to the lone surviving rose from the bouquet he gave her for her birthday. However, the police revealed a receipt indicating that Kristin purchased a single rose on the same day Gregory passed away. The court learned about the circumstances of Gregory's death and the elevated levels of fentanyl detected in the tested samples. Dr. Brian Blackburn, the medical examiner for San Diego County, who conducted Gregory's autopsy, provided testimony stating that Gregory had already been deceased for at least an hour before the paramedics arrived. Dr. Blackburn informed the court that Gregory exhibited early bronchopneumonia, a condition arising when normal breathing processes fail to eliminate accumulated secretions in the lungs due to unconsciousness or shallow breathing. Furthermore, Dr. Blackburn disclosed that Gregory's bladder contained a significant amount of urine. This condition would have been uncomfortable for Gregory if he were conscious. As a result, Dr. Blackburn concluded that Gregory had experienced inadequate breathing for approximately 6 to 12 hours leading up to his demise. During Dr. Blackburn's testimony, he clarified that the amount of clonazepam discovered in Gregory's blood was not at the level of an overdose and deemed non-fatal by medical standards. The court was informed that the presence of fentanyl, especially in such elevated levels, was uncommon, and the Office of the Medical Examiner typically did not include it in routine tests. However, due to a conflict of interest, the samples were sent to Pacific Toxicology, and they conducted specific tests for fentanyl. In support of the prosecution, Dr. Theodore Stanley provided testimony. Dr. Stanley explained that fentanyl is a potent and rapid-acting pain reliever, emphasizing a serious side effect associated with it, the potential to induce respiratory failure, causing a person to stop breathing. Dr. Stanley testified that the speed with which fentanyl takes effect depends on the manner in which it is administered. The peak effect occurs about 16 hours after administration of a transdermal patch, 20 to 30 minutes after oral consumption, 15 to 20 minutes after intramuscular injection, and 5 minutes after intravenous injection. Dr. Stanley informed the court that fentanyl is typically not administered orally because the liver destroys approximately 65% of it, allowing only 35% to enter the bloodstream. However, when questioned about how fentanyl entered Gregory's body, neither Dr. Blackburn nor Dr. Stanley could offer a definitive opinion. Dr. Stanley suggested that the varying concentration levels in Gregory's system, combined with evidence of him being unconscious and breathing shallowly for an extended period before his death, indicated that fentanyl might have been administered to him multiple times. The prosecution, while unable to definitively explain how Kristin poisoned Gregory, presented indications that she may have applied fentanyl patches to his arm while he slept. The court was made aware that following Gregory's death and the discovery of fentanyl use, the Office of the Medical Examiner conducted an audit of its impounded drugs and drug standards. This audit revealed the disappearance of 15 fentanyl patches and 10 milligrams of fentanyl standard. Furthermore, the audit disclosed that Kristin had logged in the fentanyl standard and had been involved in each of the 3 cases where the missing fentanyl patches had been impounded. The Office of the Medical Examiner also discovered that quantities of methamphetamine, clonazepam, and OxyContin, a time-released form of oxycodone, were unaccounted for. It was the defense's case that Kristin was innocent. They conceded that fentanyl caused Gregory's death, but it was the defense's case that he committed suicide because he was despondent over his marital problems. During the trial, Kristin testified in her own defense. She informed the court that when she woke up on the morning of November 6th, Gregory appeared disoriented. At 7:42 a.m., she left a message with his employer, notifying them of his illness and absence from work. Kristin stated that she went to work but returned home to check on Gregory later. They had lunch together after midday. According to Kristin's testimony, she inquired about Gregory's earlier state, and he admitted to taking some of her oxycodone and clonazepam. After lunch, he went back to bed, and she returned to work. Leaving work at 2:30 p.m., she went back to the apartment, met with Michael, and then returned to the apartment around 5 p.m. She left again at 6:30 p.m. for errands. Kristin claimed to have returned at 8 p.m. and took a bath. Kristin testified that she entered the bath, believing Gregory was asleep, only realizing he wasn't breathing upon getting out. It was at that point she called 911. During cross-examination, the prosecutor criticized Kristin's account as bizarre. She admitted to previous lies, including ones about her prohibited substances use. The prosecutor emphasized that fentanyl, being challenging to detect, was an ideal poison, a fact Kristin, familiar with such substances due to her job, was well aware of. Despite Dr. Blackbourne's testimony stating that the clonazepam levels in Gregory's blood were not fatal, the defense argued that the combination of oxycodone and clonazepam could have a synergistic effect, making them more potent. However, this explanation did not address the mystery of how fentanyl was consumed and why such high levels were present. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kristin guilty of first-degree murder and murder by special circumstances due to the use of poison. She was subsequently sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kristin appealed her conviction, and during the appeals court proceedings, it was revealed that errors were made by her own defense team. Her lawyers admitted that while they acknowledged fentanyl as the cause of death, they neglected to request testing for fentanyl metabolites in the autopsy samples. This test could have helped establish whether Gregory had actually ingested fentanyl or if the presence of fentanyl in the samples was a result of laboratory contamination after his death. If the fentanyl was exclusively found in the samples and had never been in Gregory's body, it would have contradicted the prosecution's argument that fentanyl caused his death. The question arises: how could fentanyl be present only in the samples, and would there be any potential for laboratory contamination if the Office of the Medical Examiner sent the samples to a different laboratory for testing? The appeals court learned that there was a break in the chain of evidence concerning the samples. The appeals court learned that the samples, designated as specimens extracted from Gregory's body, were placed in an unsealed cardboard box. The intended procedure was for immediate transportation to the sheriff's office for subsequent transfer to an external laboratory. However, due to the unavailability of the designated recipient at the sheriff's office, the box containing the samples was retained within the Office of the Medical Examiner. Approximately 36 hours later, it was eventually transported to the sheriff's crime lab. The central argument presented to the appeals court was that during this time frame, when the samples were held in the OME, anyone with a key to the building had potential access to them. This opened up the possibility that fentanyl could have been introduced to the samples posthumously, casting doubt on the theory that fentanyl caused Gregory's death. Kristin contended that there might have been a motive to contaminate the samples and frame her for murder, pointing to the personal relationships and tensions among the OME employees. In support of this argument, Kristin highlighted an incident on November 8, 2000, where Michael, one of the individuals connected to the OME, reportedly mentioned to a toxicologist at the OME that he had examined a sample of Gregory's stomach contents. The three-judge panel of the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals determined that Kristin's trial lawyers made a mistake by not challenging the prosecution's assertion that her husband died from a fentanyl overdose. They asserted that her legal team should have conducted tests on the autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites instead of conceding to the prosecution's narrative. However, they did not overturn the conviction, but rather sent the case back to federal court for a hearing to assess whether this defense error could have changed the trial's outcome. Nevertheless, following a subsequent decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, which emphasized federal court deference to state court decisions in such matters, the appeals court panel opted not to order the hearing in Kristin's case. As a result, her appeal was denied, and she remains in prison. Michael Robertson, referred to as a co-conspirator during Kristin's trial, returned to Australia and established a forensics consultancy services firm. On the 2nd of August 2015, a Sunday, 39-year-old Jason Corbett was peacefully asleep at his home in Wahlberg, Davidson County, North Carolina, United States. His household included his wife, Molly Martens, their two children, 10-year-old Jack and 8-year-old Sarah, and Molly's parents, Tom and Sharon Martens. Originally from Limerick, Ireland, Jason had enlisted the help of Molly Martens as an au pair following the tragic death of his first wife, Margaret, who succumbed to an asthma attack. At the time, Molly was 24 years old. Jason, needing assistance in caring for his young children, who were 3.5 years old Jack and 1.5 years old Sarah, brought Molly from Knoxville, Tennessee, United States to Ireland. Over time, a romantic relationship blossomed between Jason and Molly. In 2011, the family, including Jack and Sarah, relocated to Davidson County, North Carolina, as part of Jason's job as the plant manager for an international packaging company. The same year, Jason and Molly tied the knot. The Corbetts appeared to be leading a fulfilling life in North Carolina. Jason dedicated his efforts to his role at the packaging plant, while Molly took on the responsibilities of caring for the children and also found joy in coaching a children's swimming team. In the early hours of that morning, the 2nd of August, a 911 call was made at 3 a.m. Tom, Molly's father, made the call. He told the operator, My daughter's husband, my son-in-law, got in a fight with my daughter. I intervened, and I think, and he's in bad shape. We need help. He's bleeding all over, and I may have killed him." A paramedic team was dispatched to the scene, and Tom and Molly were prompted by the emergency dispatcher to administer CPR until they arrived. Unfortunately, there was nothing to help Jason. He died from multiple blows to his head. Tom and Molly were taken to the police station in separate patrol cars. Molly recounted what happened that night at their home. Around 3 a.m., 8-year-old Sarah came down to her and her husband's bedroom door. She was having nightmares again, and Molly went up to the room with her to comfort her. When Molly returned, Jason was angry about being woken up. From that point on, a row broke out between the couple, and Jason attacked Molly and began choking her. The screaming and noise was heard by Tom. He entered their bedroom with a baseball bat in his hand. Tom, 65, confirmed what his daughter said while sitting in another interview room. He told his wife to stay in the room when he woke up to screams upstairs and decided to find out what was going on. He heard Jason threatening to kill his daughter, so Tom brought along a weapon for protection, a metal bat. Tom entered the bedroom just as Jason was strangling Molly. Tom turned to Jason and asked him to let his daughter go and calm down. He refused to let Molly go, threatening to kill her. Jason turned his back toward the bathroom and began dragging Molly behind him. She resisted, but she was weaker. Tom realized his daughter could not be left alone with the aggressor and hit Jason in the head several times with the bat. However, Jason was able to knock Tom to the floor and took the bat away. Molly, at this point, afraid that Jason might kill Tom, grabbed a decorative garden stone from the bedside table and hit Jason over the head with it. Tom managed to get to his feet due to this pause and grabbed the bat and continued to hit Jason in the head. He stopped when he realized that he was already dead. Tom admitted that he didn't like his son-in-law and his family, previously advising Molly to get a lawyer and file for divorce. Police took photos of Molly and Tom for the report. What's strange is that there were no signs of a struggle, no abrasions or bruises on them. So what really happened at the Corbett house? But first, let me tell you everything in more detail. Molly Martens spent most of her life in the city of Knoxville, Tennessee. She was the only daughter in a family of 4 children. Her father, Tom, gave 30 years of his life to the FBI, and her mother was a doctor of mathematics. In his spare time, Tom coached soccer for the local children's team, and Molly practiced singing and dancing with friends. She loved to read, and as a teenager often appeared in her mother's book club, where she shared her opinions on what she had read. Sharon and Tom were highly educated and quite wealthy. After high school, Molly decided to pursue a medical degree, enrolling at Clemson University in South Carolina in 2003. Studying turned out to be very difficult and required a lot of hard work and effort. She soon dropped out of the university. In early 2007, Molly began dating Keith Magan, and they moved in together a couple months later. Molly worked as a nanny and also taught children to swim, and her boyfriend worked at a local non-profit organization. Their relationship with Molly developed quickly. She was fun, happy, and carefree. However, they both suffered from mental health issues. Molly had been diagnosed with depression and had warned Keith before she started her relationship with him that she was bipolar. Things were fine at first, Keith notes. Medication helped her with her mental health issues. But then she contracted Staphylococcus aureus. The medication for the infection seemed to block the effects of the medication for the bipolar disorder, which threw Molly out of her usual equilibrium. It was a very difficult period, as Keith said. Molly suffered from migraines and insomnia. She spent a lot of time soaking in the bathtub, sometimes just crying while lying there on the floor. At one point, Molly was taking 16 pills a day. She was unable to continue babysitting and stayed at home. Keith took over, fully providing for them both, even though he wasn't earning much. Molly was now depressed, and every time he came home, he didn't know what was waiting for him behind that door. The relationship became strained. After a while, she got better, and Molly kept saying that she wanted to get engaged to Keith. He took this step for her, thinking it might improve her condition. But he was wrong. It didn't help, and neither did her desire to have children. Molly got pregnant from Keith, however. She suffered an early miscarriage in September 2007. The following February, there was no improvement in her condition, and Molly's parents paid for her stay in the psychiatric unit at Emory Hospital in Atlanta. Here she was to be helped to stabilize her condition and prescribed the correct course of medication. 4 days later, she returned to Keith and they tried to continue living together. By the end of February, there was a rift in the couple's relationship, and Molly simply told Keith one night that she wanted to go somewhere in Europe and work there as a live-in nanny. He didn't think she should go away, much less work with children, since she couldn't even go grocery shopping on her own. Soon Molly left for Ireland, and Keith never saw her again. Molly says that this babysitting job came at a very important time for her. She was suffering from feelings of inadequacy after leaving university and didn't know who she was or who she wanted to be. She was fortunate to meet Jason, who helped her come to her senses and realize her importance in caring for his children. A few months later, Jack and Sarah started calling her mom. Living in Ireland, Molly missed her native land, so after her engagement, she proposed to Jason to marry in America and live there, to which he agreed. Tracy Lynch, Jason's sister, with whom they were always very close, says that the Molly they knew in Ireland and the same in the States are two different people. When relatives from Ireland came to Tennessee for the ceremony, they noticed Molly's strange behavior. She tried to control everything, was often angry, and was not like those happy brides anticipating marriage. Sometimes she stayed in bed and would not talk to anyone. Jason's family began to question whether he should become part of this American family, and his best friend saw the unhappy groom in front of him. He even told him to just leave, to get on a plane and return to his home country, but Jason replied that he couldn't do that. He had already made a commitment. 4 years later, Molly was very close to Jason's children and even considered them her own, but her relationship with her husband was strained. Tracy says that recently, back in 2014, Jason had been planning to move back home. He wasn't happy here and had started gaining weight. Molly was acting strangely, and he didn't like some of the things going on at home. He missed Ireland and said it would be hard for him to get out when Molly found out he wanted to. His children called her mom, but he wouldn't let her become their legal guardian. Jason didn't want to use his wife's citizenship to make a visa for himself. That way she would have no legal grounds to claim custody of the children if they later divorced. She later confessed to several of her friends about the abuse by her husband. Neighbors began to keep a closer eye on Jason. There was no visible corroboration of Molly's words, according to numerous testimonies. There were no abrasions, bruises, or other injuries, and she did not appear to be a victim of abusive behavior, not withdrawn or haggard. On the contrary, she didn't seem afraid of him. Jason, on the other hand, didn't fit the image of a tyrant. He was friendly, outgoing, generous. The Corbetts' closest neighbor reported that Molly had said things that didn't fit the big picture he knew and were most likely false. She herself admitted that she may have lied to others to make herself look good and not be ashamed of her words or actions. On August 2nd, still dressed in her pajamas after the bedroom fight, Molly answered detectives' questions and reported that Jason had abused her. She'd gone to the hospital several times, but never admitted how she got the injuries. Her husband was verbally and emotionally abusive. According to her, he sometimes sincerely apologized to her. It seemed like things were supposed to get better in their relationship. But the abuse continued, and each time the situation only got worse. Despite this, her love for Sarah and Jack kept her from leaving him. Molly added that she never told about her husband's abuse because the children were not her own and were not U.S. citizens. Jason could have taken them away from her. Several years ago, fearing that no one would believe Jason's abuse, Molly, on the advice of her attorney, began using hidden recording devices and says many of the recordings she collected have been destroyed or lost, but those that remain have been turned over to prosecutors. For example, on a recording titled "Jason Comes Home Late," December 2013, he finds the door locked and rings the bell repeatedly. She opens it within 39 seconds and apologizes. "You never mean to do anything, do you?" he asks angrily, then mocks her. Molly pleads. Multiple smacking sounds can be heard, and she begins to whimper. "I hate you," she sobs quietly before the recording cuts out. She says Jason had a key, but was too drunk to get the door open, and as often happened in their home, the fury would just rise and rise and rise until whatever was going on was all my fault. 4 days after their father's death, 10-year-old Jack and 8-year-old Sarah were interviewed twice by state authorities. The interview was conducted by an authorized social worker. The children described their father's aggression, ongoing problems in their parents' marriage, alleged verbal, emotional, and physical abuse on his part. And perhaps more importantly in all of this, the children understood and recognized these problems. Sarah, in response to questions, explained that Mom didn't want to wake Dad up, or he would get very angry and say, "Why are you waking me up?" Jack had witnessed the use of physical force by his father on 1 or 2 occasions. The social worker asked a very important question to summarize what was said. Did anyone teach them or ask them to answer certain questions in a certain way? Sarah answered, "My mom asked me to only tell the truth." A few years earlier, Jason had designated Tracy as the legal guardian of his children in the event of his death. She knew Molly wouldn't give them up without a fight. Tracy immediately flew to North Carolina and petitioned for custody of the children, and Molly did the same. 16 days after Jason's death, Tracy became the guardian of Jack and Sarah, and they moved back to Ireland. In January 2016, Tom and Molly were charged with second-degree murder. Tracy believes that Molly learned of Jason's plans to return to Ireland with the children, but without her. Then a plan was devised to get rid of him. Molly had long wanted only her children, not her husband. In July 2017, Molly and Tom went on trial for the murder of Jason Corbett. The prosecution offered a very different story of what happened, which did not include a narrative of strangulation and self-defense. Prosecutors relied almost entirely on forensic evidence, which included photographs of Jason's body and gruesome signs of a struggle in the bedroom. According to the pathologist's report, Jason was struck at least 12 times in the head. The exact number could not be given because he was hit in the same spot over and over again. The skull shows noticeable cracks and severe bruising, comparable to injuries sustained by someone who has fallen from a great height or been in a car accident. A blood spatter expert says that at one point in time, Jason's head was 30 or 45 centimeters off the floor, and he continued to be struck. According to prosecutors, Jason was first struck while he was still in bed, sedated. Jason's system, as confirmed by toxicology tests, contained a sedative prescribed in Molly's name 2 days before the tragedy. Also, Jason's $600,000 insurance policy had been changed about a year ago. Molly was now the sole beneficiary. Jurors were additionally shown photos of the defendants taken at the station on the night of August 2nd. Tom and Molly did not have a scratch on them. It was impossible to get into the fight Molly described with a man bigger, stronger, and taller than you and not get a scratch or a bruise. Presumably, Tom and Molly were delaying the 911 call, making up their story for the police while Jason's body was cooling on the floor. This thought was made as paramedics who arrived at the Corbett home noted the low temperature of his body. It was already cold. There was no disclosure of abusive behavior on Jason's part at trial. In general, the issue of domestic violence was minimally discussed during the trial. Tom, in his testimony, claimed that Jason had a great deal of control over Molly. He noticed bruises on her body but could not understand where they came from, although he admitted that he had never seen physical aggression on Jason's part except on that August night. Before sentencing, Molly said, "Incidents like August 2nd happened quite regularly. The only difference is that this time my father was in the house." In defense of his clients, the attorney pointed to a photo from the station where Molly had a red mark on her neck, confirming strangulation. 2 weeks before the incident, Jason had a standard physical exam, and the doctor claimed he had been under stress lately. He complained of uncontrollable outbursts of unreasonable anger. The autopsy found marks on Jason's left arm, indicating that he was defending himself, but not on his right arm, which he allegedly used to hold Molly by the neck. 9 days of testimony, arguments, photos from the scene of the tragedy, and the jury left to deliberate after spending less than 5 hours in the room. They found Tom and Molly guilty. Both received sentences of 20 to 25 years in prison, the court ruled. A few days after the verdicts were announced, the lawyers filed an objection to the court's decision, the main argument being judicial errors. In particular, incorrect actions of the jury. They violated the judge's instructions. Even before the verdict was announced, one of the jurors gave an interview and said to journalists that some of them had already discussed the case in private conversations, which is strictly prohibited. But the court denied the motion. In January 2019, the appeals court only allowed the defense and prosecution to present oral arguments in Molly and Tom's case. The defendants themselves were not in the courtroom. Each side had only half an hour to present their main arguments. On February 4th, 2020, the North Carolina Court of Appeals reversed Tom and Molly's conviction and ordered a new trial, specifically because, among other errors in the first trial, evidence that Jason may have been violent toward Molly was excluded. A year later, the North Carolina Supreme Court upheld the appellate court's decision, despite a challenge filed by the state. It ruled that the exclusion of certain evidence at trial and the erroneous inclusion of others may have prevented Tom and Molly from presenting a meritorious defense, and their words of self-defense thus had little evidentiary basis. In turn, the jury was not fully informed about the evidence, and they were unable to fulfill their constitutional function. In all, Molly and Tom spent 44 months behind bars and were released on $200,000 bail each in April 2021. It is important to note, with so much emphasis on interviews given by two young children shortly after their father had just died, and while in the custody of Molly's family, that both Jack and Sarah have since recanted the statements they made. They said that they were coached to lie about domestic abuse. They have since told the Davidson County District Attorney's Office from their residence in Ireland that Molly coerced them into making those statements, which were completely false, and that it was actually Molly who had been abusive. In November 2023, a new trial took place, where the judge ordered Molly Martens and her father Thomas to prison for a minimum of 7 months. After an emotional final day of sentencing hearings, the pair were let out of a North Carolina court in handcuffs on Wednesday, receiving sentences ranging from 7 to 30 months for the voluntary manslaughter of Jason Corbett. This is in addition to the 3.5 years Molly and Thomas have already served after previously being convicted of murder.